All normal fathers do it, Kaelen. It's just expected. My future son-in-law, Bryce, uttered this phrase with that light, condescending smile he believed made him charming. We were sitting in the finest restaurant in Ketchikan, Alaska. Beyond the panoramic window, rain drew silver streaks against the dark waters and the silhouettes of fishing vessels. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner for my only daughter Aurora's engagement, but I could feel the air in the room growing thick and cold. "A cruise, Bryce?" I asked, slowly setting down my fork. "Yes," he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up. "A honeymoon. Can you imagine? The Caribbean, white sand, cocktails. Aurora deserves the best. And, you know, the father of the bride traditionally gives a gift like this. It's like an investment in his daughter's happiness." I looked at Aurora. She sat beside him, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She looked at me with her big, trusting eyes, in which I still saw the little girl who once collected shells on the shore. "Dad, that would be so amazing," she whispered. She didn't see what I saw. She didn't see the disdain in his eyes as he glanced at my simple but sturdy watch. She didn't hear the condescension in his tone when he spoke of my work at the port, calling it an interesting local business. She only saw the shiny facade. A financial consultant from Seattle, perfect hair, an expensive suit, promises of a luxurious life. All normal fathers. That phrase stuck in my head. He stood in my world, on my island, breathing my salty air, and dared to tell me what was normal. He, whose hands had never known harder work than tapping on a keyboard. He, who looked at the ocean and saw only a pretty picture for Instagram, not a force that gives and takes life. I, Kaelen Wren, had spent my entire life in this port. I started by unloading fish, then bought an old schooner, then another. Today, I owned the entire port of Ketchikan. Every pier, every warehouse, every crane. I wasn't just the owner. I was a part of this place, its blood and salt. And I could arrange any cruise, absolutely any. And in that moment, looking at his smug face, I made a decision. He wanted a cruise, he would get one. He wanted me to be a normal father. Oh, I would be the best father he could ever dream of. I would teach him a lesson he wouldn't get in any business school. A lesson that in Alaska, respect must be earned. And that the ocean is not always gentle. I slowly smiled. For the first time all evening. "You're right, son," I said, and the word son sounded like scraping metal. "Aurora deserves the best. Consider the cruise booked. I'll arrange everything. It will be an exclusive tour. The kind you can't buy for any amount of money." Bryce's face lit up with triumph. Aurora jumped up and hugged me. "Thank you, Dad. I knew you'd understand." She didn't understand. She didn't understand anything. But she would soon. They both would. What awaited them was not just a cruise. It was a lesson in humility, and I had just personally issued the tickets. For you to understand my plan, you must understand my life. I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I was born here, in Ketchikan, to a fisherman's family. My father spent his entire life at sea, battling storms for a meager catch. He died when his old boat capsized during a sudden storm in the Bering Sea. I was 16, and that day, standing on the pier and looking at the furious ocean, I made a promise to myself. I would not fight the sea. I would work with it. I would conquer it not with force, but with intelligence. I started from the bottom. I unloaded crates of fish, scrubbed decks, mended nets. I didn't shy away from any work. I listened to the stories of old captains, studied charts, memorized every rock, every current. I saved every dollar. When I was 25, I bought my first old tugboat. I named it Lena, after my late mother. I worked day and night, hauling cargo between the islands. I never took on a debt I couldn't repay. I never made a promise I couldn't keep. My word was my greatest asset. Over time, the Lena grew into a fleet. Tugboats, barges, then I bought my first pier, then another. I built modern warehouses, installed powerful cranes. I created Port Mackenzie, a company that became the heart of logistics in Southeast Alaska. I employed hundreds of people. I knew every one of my workers by name. I paid them honestly and demanded one thing in return: respect. Respect for the work, for the ship, and for the sea. My wife, Clara, always supported me. She was an artist from Seattle who came to Alaska for inspiration and stayed forever. She saw beauty in the harsh nature, in the weathered faces of the fishermen, in the rusted hulls of the ships. "You're not just building a port, Kaelen," she would say. "You're building a community." She died of an illness 10 years ago, leaving me with our most precious treasure, our daughter, Aurora. Aurora grew up here at the port. She knew the smell of fish and diesel. She knew what an 18-hour workday was like during the fishing season. But I wanted a different life for her. I sent her to the best university. I wanted her to see the world. And she did. But when she returned, she brought back not only a diploma, but also Bryce. I saw right through him from the first minute. He was like those cruise liners that dock in our harbor in the summer. Huge, shiny, loud, but completely alien to this place. He looked at my world as an exotic amusement. He didn't understand it, and he didn't try to. To him, my docks were just assets. My ships were fleet units. My people were personnel. He spoke the language of money, and I spoke the language of labor. When he mentioned the cruise, and I knew it was time for a lesson. The next morning, I didn't go to my modern office. I went to the old part of the port, the part that still smelled of fish and tar. I found him on board his vessel, Gunnar, an old Icelander, the captain of the fishing trawler Katmai Queen, a tough, dangerous man who had spent more time at sea than on land. We had known each other for 40 years. He was one of the few men I could call a friend. He was sitting on the deck, mending a net with his huge, gnarled hands. "Kaelen," he grunted, without looking up. "What brings you to my swamp?" "I have a job for you, Gunnar," I said, sitting down opposite him. "I don't do tourists," he snapped. "These are special tourists," I smiled. "My daughter and her fiancé. They want an exclusive cruise, the best Alaska has to offer. I thought of you." Gunnar finally looked up at me with his pale blue eyes. A spark of understanding flickered in them. "Exclusive, you say? On the Queen?" He glanced around his trawler, rusty, scratched, reeking of fish, but as solid as a rock. "Exactly. I'll pay for your fuel and provisions for 2 weeks, and a bonus on top for the exclusive service. I need them to see the real Alaska, the Bering Sea, the king crab season. No special treatment. They need to feel what real work is, what the real sea is." Gunnar was silent for a long time, his gaze studying my face. Then he slowly smiled, revealing his smoke-stained teeth. "A city boy, huh? Thinks the ocean is a hotel swimming pool." "Something like that," I nodded. "All right, Kaelen," he said, turning back to his net. "I'll take your tourists. The captain's cabin will be their suite, and all-inclusive will mean waterproof gear, a fish-gutting knife, and 18 hours of work on deck. I think it will be very exclusive." I shook his hand, which was as strong as a vice. "Thank you, my friend." "Don't thank me," he muttered. "I haven't had this much fun in years." I walked away from his trawler, feeling satisfied. The plan was in motion. I had bought them a cruise, and this was a cruise they would remember for the rest of their lives. Over the next week, I played the part of the loving father. I helped Aurora and Bryce prepare for their dream trip. They were euphoric. Bryce condescendingly told all his friends on the phone about the private, exclusive cruise to the glaciers that his tycoon father-in-law had arranged for them. Aurora bought expensive evening gowns and bikinis, picturing herself on the deck of a luxury yacht. I just smiled and nodded. "Dad, what's the dress code on the ship?" she asked one evening. "Very simple, sweetheart," I replied. The main thing is to be warm and comfortable. And don't forget your sunglasses. The sun on the water can be very bright. The night before their departure, I hosted a farewell dinner for them. Here, I said, handing them 2 beautiful envelopes. Your tickets and itinerary. The ship is called the Katmai Queen. Departure is tomorrow at 7 in the morning from Pier 7. Katmai Queen, Bryce read, his face beaming with pleasure. Sounds majestic. Must be some new expedition yacht. Something like that, I replied. Very reliable, tested by time and storms. The morning of departure arrived. I went to the port early to check on everything. The Katmai Queen was docked at Pier 7, looking even more formidable and stern in the morning sun. Gunnar and his crew, 5 grim, weathered fishermen, were already preparing to set sail. The deck was cluttered with crab pots, and a sharp smell of diesel and fish emanated from the vessel. A perfect picture. At exactly 6:30, an expensive SUV pulled up. Aurora and Bryce got out. They were dressed as if they had just stepped out of a fashion magazine. Bryce in pristine white linen pants and a blue blazer. Aurora in a light summer dress and a straw hat. Behind them, a driver was unloading huge Louis Vuitton suitcases. They looked around, confused. Dad, where is the ship? Aurora asked, looking at the massive cruise liners docked at the main piers. Yours is right here, sweetheart, I said, pointing to the Katmai Queen. They turned. I saw a whole range of emotions on their faces. First, confusion. Then, surprise. And finally, horror. What is that? Bryce stammered, his face turning pale. That's the Katmai Queen, I replied with an innocent smile. Your exclusive cruise ship. You're kidding, he blurted out. That's a rust bucket. It's a fishing trawler. The best king crab trawler on the entire coast, I said with pride. You wanted the real Alaska? Here it is, no tourists, no casinos, just you, the crew, and the ocean. Aurora looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. Dad, I don't understand. You promised. And I kept my word. This will be a trip you'll never forget. At that moment, Gunnar descended from the trawler. He looked them up and down with his icy gaze. Are these my passengers? He grunted. Yes, Captain, I replied. This is Miss Aurora and Mr. Bryce. They'll be joining you on your expedition. There are no passengers on board, Gunnar snapped. Only crew. Their clothes are not suitable. He nodded to one of the sailors, who brought out 2 sets of waterproof gear soaked in fish oil and rubber boots. Change into these, and leave the suitcases here. There's no room for them on board. Take only the bare essentials. Bryce stood there, thunderstruck. I'm not going anywhere on this thing. Oh, you are, I said quietly, stepping closer to him. You wanted a cruise. You said all normal fathers do this. I turned out to be normal. I paid for the best tour I could find. And you will go, so as not to offend me, and not to disappoint my daughter. I looked at Aurora. She was crying. Dad, please. Sweetheart, I said, hugging her. Sometimes the most important lessons are learned in the most unexpected places. Just trust me. This will be good for both of you. I handed their passports to Gunnar. For maritime formalities, Captain, keep them in your safe. That was the final nail. They were trapped. I watched as they, humiliated and bewildered, changed and boarded the Katmai Queen. The trawler gave a long, hoarse blast of its horn and slowly pulled away from the pier, heading for the open sea. Bryce stood on the deck, glaring at me with hatred. Aurora was just crying. I stood on the pier until their ship became a tiny dot on the horizon. I felt no joy, only a heavy sense of rightness. The lesson had begun, and now only the ocean would decide if they would learn it. I wasn't on board the Katmai Queen, but I was living that cruise with them. Every 2 days, when the satellite connection was stable, Gunnar would call me. His reports were short, dry, but from them I could picture the entire scene. Call 1, day 3, somewhere in the Gulf of Alaska. "They're still alive, Kaelen," Gunnar's voice crackled through the static, though the boy seems to wish he were dead. Seasickness knocked him down in the first few hours. He doesn't leave the cabin, just groans. My men joke he's feeding the fish more than we're catching them. "And Aurora?" I asked, my heart clenching. The girl is tougher than she looks. She was nauseous too, but she's holding on. Sits on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, and watches the waves. Doesn't talk. But she's watching. That's good. It means she's still fighting. Call 2. Day 6, approaching the Aleutian Islands. "The boy finally came out on deck," Gunnar reported, "green as seaweed. I told him it was time to earn his keep, gave him the job of gutting fish. He looked at me as if I'd suggested he eat his own shoes. Said he was a financial consultant and wouldn't get his hands dirty. My first mate, Lars, just dumped a bucket of fish guts on him. Seems he became a bit more compliant after that." I barely suppressed a smile. "And my daughter? Aurora, she surprises me, Kaelen. She started helping in the galley. Our cook, old Sven, grumbled at first, but she turned out to be quick. She washes dishes, peels potatoes, silently, but she does it. And she started talking to the crew, asks about their families, about the sea. They've started calling her princess, but without the mockery now, with a sort of respect." Call 3, day 10, the Bering Sea. A storm is brewing. "The weather is turning." Gunnar's voice was serious. "The real work begins." We're setting the crab pots. The boy is useless. He's scared of the wind, scared of the waves, scared of the swinging pots. He's just getting in the way. I locked him in his cabin so he wouldn't get washed overboard. "God, Gunnar," I started. "Don't worry, he's safe." "But your daughter..." "Kaelen, you wouldn't recognize her. She's on deck, with everyone else. She's in her gear, her face is wind-beaten, her hair is tangled. She can't do the heavy lifting, but she helps. Hands them tools, secures ropes, brings hot coffee. She doesn't complain. She just works. I saw Lars, my tough first mate, showing her how to tie a sea knot. And she was learning. She was looking at this angry ocean not with fear, but with curiosity. She has your eyes, Kaelen. The eyes of someone who isn't afraid of the elements." I listened in disbelief. My little Aurora, who was afraid of breaking a nail, was now standing on the deck of a fishing trawler in the middle of a storm in the Bering Sea. Call 4. Day 13, heading back. "We're heading back." "Good catch," Gunnar reported. "The storm has passed." The boy came out of his hole again, silent. Stares at one spot. He's broken. Completely. He doesn't argue, doesn't complain anymore, just does small chores like an automaton. An empty shell. Aurora? Aurora is sitting on deck with Lars, and they're talking. She's laughing. I heard her laugh. A real laugh, not like at that party. She asked me if I could teach her to read nautical charts. She said she'd never seen anything more beautiful than the sun rising over the Bering Sea after a storm. She has changed, Kaelen. The sea either breaks people or makes them stronger. It made your daughter stronger. And her fiancé, it just dissolved him. I hung up. I felt a mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness that my daughter had to go through this to see the light, and pride that she had endured. She had found the strength within herself that I always knew she had. Her mother's strength, the strength of Alaskan women. Now all that was left was to wait for their return, and to see with my own eyes what the sea had done to them. The Katmai Queen entered the harbor not like a cruise liner. It didn't glitter with lights or play music. It came in quietly, tiredly, like an old warrior returning from battle. rusty, salt-stained but unbroken. It docked at Pier 7, and 3 figures emerged on deck. Gunnar, Bryce, and Aurora. I barely recognized them. Bryce. He was a shadow of the confident, handsome man who had stood here 2 weeks ago. He had lost weight, his face was gray and stubbled. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by an old, stretched-out sweater. He didn't look at me. His gaze was empty, fixed on something in the distance. He stepped onto the pier as if afraid of the solid ground beneath his feet and silently shuffled toward the port exit, not even trying to collect his suitcases. He just disappeared. Dissolved, just as Gunnar had said. And then I saw Aurora. She had changed, too. Her face was weathered, her hair tangled from the salty wind. There were noticeable scratches on her hands, but her eyes, they were shining. Not with the artificial sparkle from the party, but with a calm, deep light. She didn't look tired. She looked strong. She slowly walked down the gangplank. She stopped a few feet from me. We looked at each other for a long time. I didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry? I told you so." All words seemed inappropriate, and then she took a step and hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered in my ear. And in that simple "thank you," there was everything. Forgiveness, understanding, and gratitude. We stood like that for a long time, until Gunnar grunted behind us. "Hey, enough with the tender moments. Help unload the crab." Aurora pulled away and, smiling, looked at the old captain. "With pleasure, Captain." And I watched in amazement as my daughter, without hesitation, grabbed a gaff hook and started helping the crew haul the heavy pots from the hold. She moved confidently, knowing what to do. That evening, we sat at my house, not in a restaurant. I made a simple dinner, grilled fresh salmon. "He's gone," Aurora said, looking out the window. "Bryce, he didn't even say goodbye, just sent a text saying he's going back to Seattle." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be," she replied. "I'm not sorry either. At sea, there's no room for lies. You can't fool the ocean, you can't lie to a storm, and you can't lie to yourself. I saw who he really was. And more importantly, I saw who I was." She turned to me. "I've been living in an illusion for years, Dad. I thought happiness was expensive things and shiny promises, but out there at sea, I talked to Lars. He told me about his family, about how he spends months at sea so his children can get an education. I understood what true value is. It's not what you can buy, it's what you're willing to give." The next morning, she came to my office. "I want to work here," she declared. "Not in a cubicle. I want to start on the docks. I want to know everything. Like you." And so she began. She put on work boots and started working as a dispatcher at the port. She learned from the old dock workers, laughed at their jokes, listened to their stories. She earned their respect, not as the boss's daughter, but as one of them. A year passed. One day, I was standing in my favorite spot at the end of the longest pier, looking out at the sea. Aurora came up to me. She was no longer an intern, but my deputy. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about how proud your mother would be of you," I replied. She smiled. I sometimes think about that cruise. It was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me." "Why the best?" "Because out there in the storm, I found what I had been looking for all my life. Not wealth, not adventure, I found my home right here." She gestured around at the port, the ships, the people, the mountains. This was my legacy. "Right?" "Right, sweetheart," I nodded. "Absolutely right."